the book from, I think it's page 9. In other words, the GOP is unwell, and lots of good, already hurting people see it clearly. They understand the gravity of these moments for our nation, and they are rightly terrified by the lack of accountability. Men and women already prone to depression and anxiety, often driven to despair, even without extenuating circumstances, now also have objective data that make the hopelessness quite sensible. I just think that's a terrifically well put point of yours. And it's one that I just want to dive into here a minute, because we hear about all these mental health issues for young men and women related to phone use and all the rest of it. And I know you're on board with that and you understand that trajectory as well. But this is different. You're talking about the kind of thing my wife Jeannie and I have discussed, where sometimes we just feel down and we feel low. And it is that sort of impending doom sense of where our major political party on the Republican side of things has gone, and becoming this kind of authoritarian shadow of its former self.
That's right.
And it's really a depressing situation. So I've never seen anybody actually kind of address that as a mental health issue. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, Frank, as someone who's been really open about his own, crisis and difficulties with depression, that was always helping people understand that I didn't need actual reality to give me those, those feelings. But now we have a whole generation of people. We have millions of people who are intelligent and they're informed and they're reasonable, and they're looking at something that is irrational and unreasonable and completely predatory. And they're trying to figure out how people around them that they grew up respecting, loving, worshiping alongside, how they have fallen for this. And so there's this disbelief that you're trying to love people who seem completely disconnected from the reality that you're living in. And so how do you function in that? How do you keep an even keel emotionally? And then how do you enter a world every day where you have to rub shoulders with these people? Because over and over, the theme of the book is really, these are political and theological issues, but more than that, they're relational. And that's where they settle. They settle in our families and friendships and churches, and trying to figure out those relational fractures. That's at the heart of a lot of this, I think.
Yeah, and I think the big disconnect too, that you've just mentioned families in that list, but just dwell on that a little longer. The whole idea of a journey spiritually away from perhaps the way one was raised, something that I've experienced, as you know, and I've written about.
That's right.
But it goes a step further here, because I don't know how to put this. It's really Alice through the looking glass stuff. It is a mirror world where it's not a disagreement anymore. You really now believe that there are people in your life who are significantly delusional
Mm,
and are involved in conspiracy theories to a level where they literally do not subscribe to reality in a way we mean it, and in a very basic way. I'm not talking political philosophy. I mean, just basically, what is real? That's truly disturbing.
and that's right. And then to try to figure out what is the balance between my convictions and my relationships? I think
Mm.
we're always in those tensions, but now we're in profoundly a place where to really affirm the things that we believe in, it's almost an antithetical relationship with people that we love. And so I'm always sort of wrestling with that. I know you are. And I have been someone who for years has fought with and for my faith tradition simultaneously.
Mm.
And that goes for now family. When are we fighting for relationships? And when do we have to realize that relationship is really right now, there's a wall there, and we need to move our energies into something else, whether that's alternative community, whether that's the work that we're doing. So there are so many people who are feeling a sense of homelessness, whether in their families, their church, their country.
Yeah, I'm reading another passage from Worth Fighting For, um, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending, which is John's new book, released today. Here's a passage, and this is going to take a little longer, John, because I just really like
Sure.
this to sink in. This is from page 52. For a while, there have been warnings of a coming civil war in this country, but that is inaccurate. Such an image implies aggressive physical combat. It evokes images of brother killing brother in bloody, acrid battlefields, a brutal and violent hand-to-hand battle waged in close quarters, but those are likely not the rules of engagement in our coming struggle. What's increasingly clear to me is that a relational Cold War is far more likely. That the coming season in America will be marked by emotional distance where closeness once existed. It will be made of empty chairs and blocked social media accounts and separate holidays and protracted non-communication. It will be a widening divide created by profound moral incompatibilities, revealed in ways that would not have existed in any other circumstances. I suppose this is a bittersweet gift. In a way, pulling back the curtains of decorum and phony civility, allowing us to see people's hearts with clarity. We can no longer hide behind the stories we thought were true about those we love and share life with, and about the place we live. We are showing what sides we are on and what hills we're willing to allow relationships to die on. And that's from page 52. And I think it's, again, a beautifully crafted paragraph. The writing is lovely, but unfortunately, it evokes a truth that I think is really grounded in the reality we face. And I think it shows a lot of wisdom on your part. And also, by the way, hats off to you for not going into a sensational deep dive on the Civil War subject, but rather really looking at the reality of what faces us rather than, the usual kind of alarm bells just to sell another book. I think what you've said really seems very real and true to me. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think the news will always give us the sort of that loud incendiary imagery, and for me it's a much quieter experience and a much sadder experience, really,
Yeah.
because underlying all of this is a tremendous amount of grief that we're all
Mm,
doing.
mm,
And that was something early on that I wanted to address in the book, that there are people who were grieving people we lost in the pandemic. We're not even able to really process any of that. We had to just move on. But then we're grieving our loss of our image of America or the church or our families. And so there's a tremendous sadness. And I would probably say it's sadness even on the other side politically. They're seeing the empty chairs and the distances, but they have a different story that they tell themselves about why those exist. But for
mm.
people who are resonating with what, the words that I'm writing, there's just a tremendous sadness and a feeling of, I've lost so much now, and I don't know if I'll ever get any of it back. And so there's a way that we're going to have to retribe. We're going to have to
Mm.
figure out who our people are and create a new way going forward. So that's been the story for me, leaving much of the church behind, as you've experienced as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that the way you put this is a perfect segue. And I assure my listeners and watchers this was not rehearsed, but it's so on the nose for what I wanted to read next that it's kind of funny. From page 62, John writes, I hope I don't make it sound like loving those we disagree with is easy. Loving beyond our capabilities is almost always going to be inconvenient beforehand and beautiful afterward, rarely the other way around. Redemptive acts are often preceded by the fractures that necessitate them. Something needs repair because it is broken, a relationship, a system, a nation. No matter what story we tell ourselves when we put people on blast or shout them down, or block them on social media, nothing feels as good as when we show someone more decency than they may deserve, when we err on the side of loving them, even if their response is less than appreciative. So in a way, you kind of take what you were saying a moment ago into another step here a few pages later. So you want to dive into that a little bit?
I think the challenge, Frank, is the most dangerous place to be in is when I can dehumanize another human being, because
Mm,
that's what the right has been doing. It's why it makes him so easy to rail against immigrants or LGBTQ people or women or people of color. When they see someone as less than, it's you can justify all sorts of terrible things. And so that is the greatest danger for myself, because I'm wired to have compassion for certain groups of people. It comes really easily for me, but there
mm,
are people that I'm reticent to show empathy to, and that includes many people who, as we've been talking about, seem disconnected from reality and seem motivated by this predatory, exclusionary faith tradition.
Mm,
And that's where I'm trying to make sure that I don't dehumanize them to the point that I dismiss dismiss the inherent goodness that is in each human being, and
mm,
somehow that I show the best of myself in these conflicts, in these disagreements,
mm,
which is almost impossible because the turbulence is so great and so constant that we really don't get a rest from it. And
mm.
so that's a lot of this too. It's kind of stepping back from the fray once in a while and saying, okay, have I become the thing that I despise in so many? And can I be a person of dignity and humanity while still fighting? Can I be loud and loving at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because you on page 75 you write, years ago I sat on a panel discussion on quote progressive Christianity. The host's first request of the panelists was to describe what progressive Christianity meant to them. My new friend, it was new back then, not
Yeah.
anymore. You guys know each other a long time. My new friend, Reverend Vince Anderson, took the mic and said, quote, let's be clear, progressive Christianity is just Christianity. We are Christians and we are processing our knowledge and understanding, end quote. And then you add, we could have stopped there. So that's interesting. You quote Vince because I interviewed him. I think I was on my last podcast last week or a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
And
wow.
my oldest granddaughter came up for uh, Easter dinner this weekend and said, hey, I just watched your interview with Vince. She was on the road with us. You remember Amanda out there on the
Yep.
bus for the Common Good tour. She was the person doing all the arranging of where to park and motels and restaurants and all the
Yes.
rest. So she knew Vince well and loved the fact I just interviewed him. So it's a nice circle here between a granddaughter and my friend John Pavlovitz and Vince Anderson. But I love that you quote him in the book.
Well, for me, it was one of those moments where I just remembered, and for someone who does what I do, having come to sort of some national recognition, being a pastor with views that maybe pastors they hadn't heard a lot of pastors espouse, there's been, this question of, are you representing the religious left or progressive Christianity? And at that time, I sort of was, but now I've moved to a place where I just represent myself. And these are
Mhm.
one person, one flawed and failing human being trying to answer these existential questions. And I just share where I am, and people with whom those words resonate, they join me and we become community. And so it's been a gift to be able to do that kind of work that is independent of those systems so that we can simply speak freely and meet in our humanity. And I wish we were doing more of that.
Yeah, in the when we were out on the road together doing the Boat Common Good tour, you also talk about an incident that happened out there where one of our, I was going to call her a cast member, but it wasn't. I mean, we were campaigning for congressional candidates. Um, we had that incident where she invited some people from, I think it was the Proud Boys, up on stage and kind of
That's right.
turned the situation around with the kind of reaching out that you're advocating, but is hard to do. And you use Jessica B as a not Genesis B. My daughter's name's Jessica, so sorry. Genesis B as a example. You want to just talk about that incident a little bit?
Sure, we thought they were going to be coming, and we weren't sure. We'd heard on that tour that they would be showing up, and they hadn't. And then this one day, they finally did. And the story for me was, I was someone, as a white cisgender heterosexual guy, I felt protective of some of the women and the more vulnerable people, and Genesis being a woman of color, and wanting to sort of have this protective emotion or response. But my inclination was anger. That was the rage began to get in the way. I'm trying to preach about the love of Jesus up there, and I'm just screaming like a demented auctioneer because I'm just so, my fists are clenched, and I was realizing as it was coming out of my mouth what a disconnect this is.
Hmm.
And of course, she goes up and invites this person to embrace her and saying, you are my potential co-collaborator. I don't see you as an enemy. And that was a lesson for me in different ways to disarm anger. So we want to shout down, or we want to give an opposing political view, or we want to hit them, theologically. And Genesis met them in their humanity and tried to reach them that way. And it didn't necessarily change them, but it softened them in the moment, and maybe they file that away for the next time. So for me, there is also that, what is a win when we're dealing with someone across from us, whether they're on social media or our living rooms or in our churches? What is a
Hmm.
win in these exchanges?
Yeah, it was an interesting evening. I remember being on the platform that night, and things were quite tense until Genesis got up there and did her thing. And then after that, it changed completely. You know, instead of them waving signs and heckling us, they all stood around listening politely. It was
Yeah.
really a kind of an object lesson. They ought to show a clip of that in police training of how to defuse a situation when you're facing angry people, because she did such a magnificent job. You know, one young
That's right.
woman of standing up there in the middle of that, and it was quite something. I want to go to a page 121, 122, change the subject here in terms of the kind of easy stand a lot of evangelical white Christian nationalist types take on certain issues that don't cost them personally. I thought that you were very perceptive in something you wrote here. Just to change gears for a minute, there are a number of explanations for this highly selective zealotry by religious people, but ultimately, I think it comes down to laziness and self-preservation. I think embryos are relatively easy to advocate for. They don't encroach upon people's privilege or confront their politics or challenge their theology or require much from them in the way of a lifestyle change. It is a clean form of activism, certainly far less messy and uncomfortable than having to defend people you don't like or to whom you've declared an enemy. And I think that's such an interesting point. I never, my family, all the way back into the day in the 1970s, was so involved in the beginnings of the evangelical pro-life movement, something that I've changed my mind about a long time ago and advocated on the other side. But I think this kind of lazy morality that you talk about is good because, if you're advocating on behalf of drug addicts or the homeless or prisoners or something, someone down the street, it's messy because now you're going to be asked, well, what are you doing for them?
That's right.
Um, Very much like the Republicans who want to ban all abortions, including the abortion pill, and are now starting to come for contraceptives. And then you ask, well, where are the Republican policies to help women who do want to have children stay at home with that child if they choose to, parental leave, help their partner to assist them, pay for something, and then all of a sudden silence. It's crickets. There's nothing because that's then messy and difficult and isn't just moralistic high ground stuff again. We want to just talk about that because I think it applies across the board to so many things where there are these inconsistencies and the kind of moralizing is easy until you're actually asked to do something for somebody.
Yeah, I think we all want at times a no cost morality or a stance that we can have that makes us feel good or righteous without having to sacrifice a whole lot or have any life change. And I think you see that on the right. And really that explains a lot about why that people who are supposed followers of Jesus still support Donald Trump after 8 years of all they've seen,
Mm.
because the bottom line is they don't want to face a crisis of asking the questions, what am I a part of? What broken systems am I contributing to? And so for people like us, we've started to ask those questions. We've confronted the grief that comes along with that and the accountability. And
Yeah.
I think so many people just don't want that. They want to tell themselves a story about their own goodness. And so by supporting this cause, they can do that, but it really doesn't affect them one way or the other, or at least they think it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. Let me just go to another place in the book that I want to talk about down on page 139. I don't know what matters enough to move you from complacency. This is sort of your wrap up, or indecision or selfishness or apathy, the human rights atrocities, the perversion of Christianity, the pillaging of the environment, the constitutional violations, the cries of migrant children, the Supreme Court hijacking, the attacks on public education, the dismantling of healthcare, the anti-science conspirators, the school shootings that go ignored, the LGBTQ teenagers being harassed, the assault on women's autonomy over their bodies, the malice of our public servants, the twisting of objective truth, the Nazis marching in our streets, the dumbing down of discourse. I don't know what grieves you right now, but you do. So instead of lamenting how horrible it all is, decide to make it less horrible. Instead of looking to the sky and wondering why no one is doing anything, you do something. And you kind of wrap your book up with that statement. I think there's actually something after that, but it's close to the end of the book. Do you want to just talk about that in the sense of, these are very broad strokes things. No one can do all of that. I'm sure you talk to people who are frustrated by their seeming inability to do anything. Do you think that I'm going to ask you a question. This is not a loaded question. I'm not fishing for anything. I just want to get your opinion. But don't you think there's a danger in listing big issues that lets us all off the hook in the same way that talking about embryos lets evangelical white Christians off the hook to actually do anything for born children because they're railing about the moralistic issue? How do you break down the list that you've got there into bite-sized pieces besides telling people to vote, which, by the way, is a huge thing? Get out the vote. I mean, that's not to be minimized. Besides
Right.
voting, do what? If you just voted, that would already be something. But besides voting for Joe Biden in the next election, so Donald Trump never sees the inside of the White House again, which is a big thing I want to emphasize again.
Mm.
How do we break down these larger issues into bite-sized pieces where individuals can actually feel that they're stepping out and making some sort of a difference? That you, in your experience, because you're an activist, so you're out there working with people all the time on the ground who are doing stuff. I know that because I've seen you in discussion with such people out on the road. But right now, at this very minute, as we head to the next election, how do we make this accessible, these big issues?
I think I tell the story somewhere in the book, but if I don't, I remember being at a Q&A at a talk in Missouri, and a gentleman said, John, I have two news feeds in my life. The one news feed is the big and the distant, and that news feed is on the news and social media. He said that news feed is always going to give me the terrible and the worst of the worst and all the incendiary stuff. He said, so I'm going to be hopeless if that's all I look at. But he said, there's a second news feed, and it's on the ground in the places where I live and work and in the places I do activism, because there I know the names and faces of people doing beautiful redemptive work. And so he said, it's easy to stay hopeful if I keep in that news feed. So that's really partly the answer. It's for people to say, where is my burden? If I look at a list like that, what are the
Mm,
one or two things? The word compassion kind of ties into the idea of bowels. What twists you in your bowels?
yeah.
That's a question I ask people all the time, and say, look at that list, and then what are the one or two things that really keep you up at night? And then
Mm,
press into those in your local community. Where can you show love for immigrants where you live? Where can you support, transgender human beings, whatever it could be? Because there you have proximity and agency. Those are the two
mm,
things we always have. And that's the heart of the book, that, yeah, you can look out there and every day find reason to be hopeless, but there's also the life that you have been given, and you have something you can do with that. So it's
mm.
simple, but it's not always easy, because in the pace and activity that we're immersed in, it can be hard to stop that and say, okay, I need to actually do something about what is grieving me.
Yeah, I'm going to just reintroduce you here. This is a podcast. My name is Frank Schaeffer, and this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. My guest is my friend, John Pavlovitz. We have shared time together on the road on a bus tour called In Common Good. What year was that, John, that we were out
I
trying to
think that
raise?
was 2018. I think that was during the
2018
midterms.
congressional election. We were out campaigning for people, and some of them actually won. So that was good.
Yeah,
We helped
right.
we helped get Congress into the blue state thing. But anyway, and he's the author of a lot of books you've heard of. If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, a bigger table, and his new book is out today. We are launching a book today with an author who's a friend, which is a real privilege. And this is called Worth Fighting For: Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. And I would urge you to get that book and read it. And it's a perfect fit as we go into makes my head spin to say this, the closing months before the next election. I mean,
Yeah.
God help us, literally. I would ask you to please subscribe to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Apple Podcasts, and to my Substack. I would ask you to subscribe to that. It has to be said at frankschaeffer.substack.com. And by the way, we do not raise funds, But if you want to support us and click the subscribe button there, you will help us because it gives us a handle on things. By the way, John, just to go off completely off subject here for a second, I've been using Facebook for many years. I post all sorts of stuff there, and I have many followers as you do. One thing that we've found that's odd is that the algorithm on Facebook is written in such a way that they look for certain words, and we got bands the wrong word, but they made it impossible for people to subscribe to us because we reprinted a New York Times headline that had the word terrorism in it. And so we triggered something. I don't know what you're finding with social media, but with this sort of revolving, this musical chairs of platforms, I don't know how anybody keeps up. This is just completely just friend to friend here. What do you do? What do you do? Ernie Gregg, my producer, has to handle all this nonsense. We don't understand the algorithms or how it works, but what do you do?
It's a completely, daily battle, Frank, because as someone who, makes their living largely online, the changes in social media platforms, they've designed these algorithms to, one, penalize people who they believe are trying to make a living off of their platform, but also there's the political element. So there are those words that, because the platform grew at such a rate, for example, with Facebook, they don't have the people to keep up. So they've been using AI
Right.
for years. And what it does is just selects those words, and then it penalizes you. And so for me, it took me months to actually reach a human being. And when the human being looked over those posts, basically said, yeah, there's nothing wrong here, because they could see it in context.
Yeah.
But that is that you constantly have to kind of fight through that and figure out, and I'll have to take out vowels and just put an
Yeah.
asterisk in those words. But really, it speaks to the difficulty for someone like you, for someone like me, to even reach the audience that we have on social media,
Well, I think you're
because
on
they,
Substack too, because they're less,
yeah,
Substack gives you, they shoot a little straighter, but also unlike Facebook, when you're on Substack, we always get suspicious when we've had a good month on Facebook and all of a sudden they find some reason to demonetize us again.
yes,
It's like, well, wait a minute, we didn't do anything different this month except, make $500 or whatever, some pitiful little
that's right,
amount.
yeah,
And then what
and
happened here?
yeah, and Twitter or X is worse, because there was almost an immediate shrinking of the reach of my and many other people on the left's platforms. So then
Yeah.
you have that issue as well. So it's incredibly difficult. So things like Substack and email are really the best way to have a direct contact with people. So I always encourage people to do those things, because that way, if the platform goes away, we still have the connection to one another, which is, in a time like this, if, let's say, Trump wins, it's going to only get worse.
Yeah,
So we need to be
exactly.
able to reach the people who are like-hearted, so that we can keep doing the work.
Well, we're going to link to anything you tell Ernie to link to, so everyone will be able to subscribe to your Substack as
Mhm.
well. Uh, Tell us how to help you because we're just trying to all survive here. And of course, and I'm not going to bitch anymore here, so turn into a moaning session. But of course, these social media giants have basically meant that nothing else can compete. They're monopolies. And then when they
Mhm.
change the rules on you, there's nothing to go to because they're making sure they own all of it. I mean, it's really
That's
disheartening.
It is, and it's more important than ever. People say, well, why do you even stay on these platforms? And I say, well, because some reach is better than no reach.
Yeah,
And I want to be a dissenting opinion for people who are there, so that people can share writings that they are encouraged and challenged by, so that other people can see them. So for
yeah,
me, I mean, there's not a lot of John Pavlovitzes in the world. So once you know how to spell my name,
yeah.
Pavlovitz, you can find me. And Substack's a great way, or on my blog or Patreon,
Well,
any of those
we'll
places.
put links to every place that you.
Thank you.
So if you
Figure
get
it out
messed
some
with,
way.
we'll have some feed some people your way. Yeah, you're
Great.
on Substack too. So anyway, let me get back to the work here of interviewing you. I had so many things I want to go through. You wrote a really good paper that was actually April 1. Is it still the first today? No, it's a couple days later. But Project 2025 and the End of America. We don't have to speculate, the headline says, on the sociopathy of the MAGA conservatives. They have put it all in writing. And then you talk about Project 2025 outlines in precise and sickening detail the Republican evangelical plan to swiftly thrust America into full-on theocracy and dismantle every legislative protection and democratic process put in place to prevent the marriage of church and state. Just, John, forgive my ignorance. Ernie sent me the link to this. Where did this appear and where can people read this? Because we'll post it, but I just don't know where they can go to get it.
Yeah, you can actually go to Project 2025. Let me just make sure it's the .org. It's .org. So it's called the Presidential Transition Project,
Yeah,
and
no,
it
no,
was
I know
born
where
out.
but where did you put your article?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is on Substack.
Oh, so okay, well there we are. They're going to think that I've set this up again. When you get the
Yeah,
link of John
it's actually
Pavlovitz's,
free.
yeah, it's free. When you get the link to Substack and subscribe, which is free, but you still subscribe and go to Substack, find John's Pavlovitz stuff on it, read this incredible article. Let me just spin down here and talk about what they've posted themselves as what they're planning on doing. And the Heritage Foundation and other people are working with Project 2025 to help them put together a legislative agenda. This is for real. And let's just remember that 50 years ago, when this all started rolling, the evangelical religious right that I was part of before I left, we were telling people that they needed to have a long-term project, and Heritage Foundation and others, the Federalist Society did. Those are the lists they gave Trump. He did it in the first term. In the second term, here is what they will get him to do, and he will do. And they are already coming up with lists of loyalists who are going to implement this. Isn't that right, John?
Yeah, there are, dozens of organizations and entities that are already preparing because they realized when Trump won in 2016, they were surprised that he won, and so they weren't even prepared as an administration, and they want to make up for that now. So they've laid out these plans that day one these things will start happening, and it's not speculation; it's the agenda.
Yeah, and they're going to get rid of all the people in the bureaucracy who are sane, reasonable, and just want to serve people. And they basically have lists of people they're going to fire and the people they want to hire. And you get hired on the basis of unswerving, unquestioning loyalty to Trump.
Yep, that's right.
And then
And
here's what they want to do. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
no, no, I was gonna say it's in the piece, but they want to dismantle whether it's the FBI, the Department of
Yeah.
Education, on and on and on, and it's really would controlling the FCC. So we look at even objectively what we think we could deal with because we're looking at the first Trump administration, but that's not what the second one would look like at all.
No.
And I think we need to understand that people who are on the fence or just opting out, they need to get
Mm.
in the game because they'll say, well, we survived before. Well, it's not going to be like that this time.
Yeah. Well, let me read some of the list here or all
Sure.
of the list here, because again, John didn't make this stuff up. This is what
Okay.
they are listing in Project 2025 as quote unquote, what we will do in a second Trump term. And so I just want to put it straight. If you don't vote, or you vote for a third party candidate, or you vote for Trump, here is what you are voting for. Okay, I'm going to say it one more time. If you don't vote for Joe Biden and Democrats on every ticket, whatever your hesitancy, whatever your disappointment, whatever you think about Gaza and Israel, I don't care. If you don't vote for Joe Biden and every single Democrat running, here is what you are voting for. Here's the list: banning abortion nationwide and tracking all pregnancy-related procedures, virtually eliminating birth control access, defunding the Department of Justice and destroying the FBI, gutting the EPA, blocking all gender-affirming care, firing 50,000 civil service workers, eliminating the Department of Education, breaking up the Department of Homeland Security, purging the government of anyone deemed, quote, disloyal to Trump, criminalizing talking about transgender people, banning all DEI initiatives and any words related to gender, sexual, and racial equality, giving presidential control of the FCC, meaning all media communications, condemning single motherhood and same-sex marriage, identifying and deplatforming all, quote, woke writers, speakers, and news outlets. Business organizations, however it defines the term, installing their president, that's Donald Trump, permanently. That's what you're voting for if you don't vote for Joe Biden and the Democrats in November. That's what you're voting for if you vote for Kennedy or any third party candidate or any person on the ballot that's not a Democrat, because unless we have a clean sweep of Democrats with both houses of Congress and keep the presidency in the hands of Joe Biden, that's what you're voting for. And I know that's very strongly put, and I'm sorry for being that doctrinaire, but I don't see any other way to slice it. That's what you're voting for.
And that's been the difficult thing, Frank, in doing this work, is to try to hold all the tensions that people have, but to say in a few months, the reality is Joe Biden or Donald Trump will be the president, and everything else falls away. And that's the decision that we have to make. So for me, I want my vote to be an extension of my beliefs, but I also need it to be strategic. And I think that's what I've been advocating for with people all wherever they fall. Because the truth is, if Biden wins in 2024, then we can all begin to craft the kind of nation where our differences, we can
Sure.
navigate those. People lament the two-party system, and I tell them, I understand that, but we'll have a one-party system if the Republicans win, and none of us will have a voice. So I'm fighting to make sure that we all retain that voice and that vote and everything that comes with it. And that's where we are. It's simply the reality of the moment.
Yeah, and I think your book, the new book, Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending, is a kind of a blueprint in terms of just why it is that we don't have the luxury to do anything except make sure Joe Biden goes back to the White House and Democrats win all the way down the line in every single role they go for. You know, when you have somebody running for president who is threatening the daughter of a judge, when you have someone who is being prosecuted on multiple levels for crimes and including intimidation and so forth and so on, you know, that's only one issue. But I want to bring something up, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, John. So please, I know this is quote unquote my podcast, but forgive me if I sound too strident here. And I will love you still if you say, well, that's
Sure.
how Frank sees it, but I don't. But I'm gonna tell you a little bit of how I think on this issue. I think there are times in history when we don't have the luxury to be 100% consistent and purists, and this is one of them. You know, Winston Churchill said terrible things about India and Hinduism. Winston Churchill, in some ways, was a racist. But during the period of the Battle of Britain, if you didn't support Winston Churchill instead of Neville Chamberlain and root for the guy who was going to send those fighter pilots up to stop Hitler before he destroyed the entire edifice of democracy, then worrying about what he said in 1920 about India or colonialism was not the point. The point is to see the moment of history you're in. And I really think that's true. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we are in a moment of inflection here where there is nothing but the big strokes. And I like what you said. If we can get past that, then we can get more nuanced again. I don't know what you think about
Exactly. No, and I agree. And it's put me at odds with many people who have supported me before, but I keep going back to, if you take a moral stance that is disconnected from everything else, it's really impossible to understand that that stance is actually antithetical to your position,
that.
because you're going to be placing immigration, healthcare, policing in the hands of someone like Donald Trump. So you're going to give a sociopath carte blanche. And so
Yeah.
that's simply, we cannot do that. And that for me, there's no politician or no political party that any of us have agreed with fully. But yet at times we act like in the past we have, and this current situation is untenable because we can't support this person or that person. But Donald Trump and the Republicans are a once in a lifetime existential crisis. And if we have to recognize that, and our vote is the only weapon that we have, the courts kind of continually fail, and so many other systems are failing. And this is the last kind of one that we have at our disposal for now. And so we have to use it.
Yeah, and looking at specifics, I mean, I'll just go through a few again. I don't want to lure you into something that you don't want to say. And these are not things that I have 100% certainty about or anything else most of the time. But it's my strong inclination to be frank because you have a following and your book is important and people watch this. And please do subscribe to John on Substack, etc. But it seems to me, for instance, one can disagree heartily with the support that we give Israel in their conflict with the Palestinians, and one can be horrified by what West Bank settlers have been doing in stealing land and murdering Palestinians, as I am.
Yep.
And one can be
Same.
horrified by the IDF just in the news now, bombing a group of people who are trying to bring food to the Palestinians. These are all gut churning horrors. One can disagree with Joe Biden's unmitigated support and look at it as something that's a holdover from another generation. All of that can be true. But I just want to look right into the camera and tell you something as a 71-year-old who will be 72 in a few weeks, who's lived through some things and made my own journey on these things. And I know what it's like to have been wrong and change your mind and look back with regret. And I would beg people who feel terrible antipathy towards certain things that Biden has done to remember something. And that is that if you think that the West Bank settlers have carte blanche under Biden right now because of his support for Israel, just wait till Donald Trump's second term. This is a man who has absolutely no compunction whatsoever about sensitivity toward the Arab community, toward Islam, or anything else. And he will make Biden's support of Israel look like a Sunday school picnic because he doesn't care. He frankly doesn't give a shit about Arab lives. These are brown people he doesn't care about. Same with the gay community and the trans community or the Islamic community in this country. Those voters in Michigan who stepped out of the process and didn't vote in the primary as a protest. I have news for you. If you're a Muslim American or you have brown skin in this country, if you put Donald Trump by negligence, not even not voting at all, say stepping back and not voting into the White House, his people are developing plans to round you up and deport you. His people are developing plans to make sure that there's never another Muslim who emigrates to this country. You have no idea what a second term will be like. It's not just the end of democracy, it's the end of any even pretense of tolerism. This is white Christian nationalism. This is far right white Christian nationalism. And I am not exaggerating. And if you are a young person and you're gay or you're trans, or you're Arab or you're Muslim or you're not white or you're Hindu, they are coming for you. And if you're a woman, they are coming for you. And they're coming for your contraceptives. And if you're gay, they are coming for you. And if there's anything you don't like about Joe Biden, and there's plenty to lament, and if you think you're getting a taste of something you don't like now, just wait if you step out of this election process and allow this to happen. And I lament the fact that I look back on parts of my life where I made a big mistake in supporting some of the Christian right agenda in my 20s, and I'm still trying to live it down. You will never forgive yourself for not doing everything you can to put Biden back in the White House. You will never forgive yourself because you will live to see what happens. You will live to see people being interned. You will live to see people being shot on our border. And I'm not exaggerating. You will live to see militias unleashed on border control. You will live to see chaos when it comes to civil rights. That's what the next Trump term will look like. And you can watch every podcast I've ever made and you will never hear me being this doctrinaire about anything. But this one I'm right on. And I promise you what I'm telling you is not an exaggeration. And that's just from my heart. And John, I'm not going to make you sign on to that at all. Give your version of that or say that I'm exaggerating.
Well, Frank, for me, the bottom line is this. I talk to people every day and try to have reasonable conversations. And I simply ask them, what group of people do you think lives will be made better by a Trump administration? Who will be safer? Who will be more seen? Who will have greater human and civil rights? And I can't think of any community that will benefit. And specifically, already vulnerable, marginalized communities. And as you said, Trump has no benevolent instinct at all. And so I'm really trying to make sure that we protect one another so that into 2025, we can begin the work of really addressing all of these terrible things. But again, we will not have the option to do that later. And people talk about blowing it all up. And I just remind them of when some people said, let's blow it all up in 2016. That's how we ended up with a weaponized Supreme Court and women losing body autonomy. So I just don't want to be cavalier about anyone else's existence. And that's the danger here.
Yeah, my producer, Ernie Gregg, just sent through this little note saying, to paraphrase John Pavlovitz, our future is worth fighting for. And if you let Trump win, you'll be knocked out of the fight forever.
Well said. Well paraphrased.
There we are. That's why Ernie gets the big
Yeah,
bucks,
that's right.
which is a joke, by the way. But anyway, let's head towards our wrap up, but not too quickly here. I want to just talk again a little bit about the book. Talk about who you hope to have read your book, because Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending is a kind of a must read for the moment. It's a very topical book because this is it. It's an outline of the fight we are in now, between now and November. Who did you write this book to? And I can't ask you the response you're getting because it's coming out today. Today's the publication date. But I know it comes out of your own wealth of experience as a hands-on activist who gets out there and does what you're telling people to do. So are there any young people who still read out there who will read your book? I know that sounds like some crazy old guy talking, but the very people who might step out and not vote, or folks who feel marginalized, whatever, how do we get people to really read this and take seriously what you're saying?
Well, I've been trying to make sure that through social media channels, I'm able to reach them through video and other ways, because you're right, there's an increasing, lack of actually opening up a book or seeking out a book. So that's what I want to have happen, is for people to read these things. And really it's meant to be, I said, a hug around the neck and a kick in the behind, whichever you're needing at the time. I want it to be something where I do speak to protecting your own health, because no one's going to prioritize it. All of us activists and advocates and allies, we face that. There's a depletion to this work, but also to realize that some people don't have the option to rest from urgency. And so we have to keep resting and then pressing in and doing the work that needs to be done. And as you've said eloquently, we've got a few months to make sure we don't get it wrong. And because millions and millions of people will inherit whatever we give them. And so that's what I want people to do after they read this book, and say, what do I want to leave to people who come after me?
Yeah, and in developing the book, I think that, because I kind of know what you do a little bit, I just want to reiterate to people watching John here that John does not write in a vacuum, because he is an activist. So, he crafts, it's like reading a book on marriage from a marriage therapist who spends every day counseling people hands-on. John's not a marriage therapist. That might be your next thing if this fails.
Yeah.
But John crafts his words according to the actual questions you get out there. And I just think that's a really powerful. In other words, I feel your book is answering, it's not written in a theoretical vacuum. You're actually talking to the people you talk to, probably answering questions you've been asked dozens of times face to face with folks when you're doing retreats. Talk a little bit about that.
That's it. I often tell people I'm speaking for myself, as I said earlier, but I'm also speaking knowing the stories of people and listening for the patterns and trying to make sure I ask the questions that they're asking and lean into the prompts that they're feeling. So this is not something that, I'm disconnected from life. This is really informed by the people I meet and the work that I see being done. And so that's why I want to connect other people to those, those questions.
Well, this is launch day and you have another thing at 2:00. So we're going to get out here, but I'll just say the book is Worth Fighting For, Finding Courage and Compassion When Cruelty is Trending. John Pavlovitz is the author and he's my friend. And please subscribe to John's Substack as well as to mine, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, on Apple Podcasts, and to my Substack, it has to be said, at frankschaeffer.substack.com, where I make commentaries of the kind that I've been making here, except sometimes a little more nuanced. And we love you, John, and we wish you well. And seriously, Godspeed with the book. Please Keep us
you.
posted. Share this wherever you want because we like to be out there as promoting you and put this out there. And all the best with your next 2 o'clock interview.
Thank you, my friend. Love and appreciate you, and we'll talk again soon.
I hope so.